Are you brave enough to look into the mirror of your own desires and admit that what you really want is not to be loved, but to be obeyed, not to be admired, but to be feared, not to be understood, but to be able to bend the will of others until their choices feel like your thoughts whispered through their blood? Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the world not as a place of kindness and fairness, but as it actually moves beneath the polished surface, a battlefield of quiet glances, withheld words, strategic silences, fragile egos, hungry ambitions, and invisible hierarchies that decide who eats first and who waits in the dark. Imagine that every smile you see is a negotiation, every compliment is a currency, every act of loyalty is a transaction waiting to be repaid, and every moral principle is a costume worn only as long as it remains useful. In this world, no one truly acts freely. They react, they respond, they orbit power like moths around a flame that both warms and destroys them. Now imagine standing in the center of that orbit, not loud, not flamboyant, not reckless, silent, precise, observant, the kind of presence that does not need to shout because the room already knows who is watching. This is not the power of kings and crowns. This is the deeper, colder power that survives revolutions, outlives regimes, and moves like a shadow through centuries. This is the power Machiavelli understood with terrifying clarity, not the fairy tale villain version that schoolbooks reduce him to, but the surgical philosopher who dissected human behavior like a living organism and wrote down what he saw without flinching. He saw that people are driven less by truth than by perception, less by loyalty than by advantage, less by love than by fear of loss. He saw that virtue is often a luxury, that morality bends under pressure, and that survival favors those who understand how to manipulate the invisible strings that pull at the heart, the pride, and the hunger of others. He saw that control does not come from force alone, but from shaping the stories people tell themselves about who they are, what they deserve, and who stands between them and the future they crave. Picture a young ruler standing alone in a candlelit chamber, listening to the echo of his own footsteps on cold stone, knowing that half the men who bow to him are waiting for his weakness, and the other half are measuring how much they can take before he notices. Picture merchants smiling politely while hiding knives behind silk sleeves, generals pledging loyalty while calculating the cost of betrayal, and friends who speak warmly while quietly preparing to leave if the tide turns. In this world, innocence is not purity. It is vulnerability, and vulnerability is not tragic. It is profitable to those who know how to harvest it. The forbidden knowledge Machiavelli offered was not how to become cruel for cruelty's sake, but how to become effective in a world that punishes softness and rewards precision. He taught that control begins not with domination, but with understanding. Understanding what people fear, what they desire, what they are ashamed of, what they are proud of, and what they will sacrifice when they feel cornered. He taught that every person carries a private hunger, a quiet wound, and an unspoken dream, and that if you learn to touch those invisible places, you do not need to push. They will move themselves. Imagine a man who wants to be seen as honorable, even while lying. Imagine a woman who wants to feel indispensable, even while being used. Imagine a leader who wants to believe he is loved, even while ruling through fear. These contradictions are not flaws in human nature. They are its engine. They are the gears that keep society turning, relationships forming, empires rising, and lives unraveling. And if you learn how to read those gears, you can learn how to slow them, accelerate them, or redirect them entirely. There is a moment in every conversation, every negotiation, every relationship, when the balance tilts. A pause after a question, a breath before an answer, a flicker of hesitation in the eyes. These moments are doors. Most people walk past them without noticing, but the one who sees them understands that this is where influence enters, not with brute force, but with timing, not with loud demands, but with quiet certainty, not with threats, but with carefully placed expectations that feel like choices, even when they are not. Machiavelli understood that people do not resist chains when they believe they are wearing jewelry. He understood that the most enduring control is the kind that makes others feel powerful while slowly narrowing their freedom, that makes them feel chosen while quietly limiting their options, that makes them feel safe while gently guiding them into dependence. He understood that if you want to make people move in a certain direction, you do not push them from behind. You place something they desire in front of them and let them chase it until they forget who set the path. Think of how often you have seen someone defend a decision that clearly harmed them. Think of how fiercely people cling to systems that exploit them, relationships that drain them, and beliefs that limit them, simply because those things give them identity, belonging, and meaning. This is not stupidity. This is the human need to feel coherent, to feel chosen, to feel special. And it is here, in this need, that the deepest levers of control are hidden. Machiavelli did not write for the kind-hearted dreamer who wants the world to be fair. He wrote for the realist who knows the world is not fair and refuses to be devoured by it. He wrote for those who would rather understand the storm than pray it passes. His words are not comfortable. They are not gentle. They do not promise salvation. They promise clarity. And clarity is dangerous, because once you see the machinery behind human behavior, you can never again pretend that people are simply good or bad. You see that they are predictable, and what is predictable can be guided. The dark truth is that influence does not begin with words. It begins with presence, with how you enter a room, with what you reveal and what you conceal, with the emotional temperature you carry around you like an invisible climate. Some people make others feel relaxed. Some make them feel seen. Some make them feel small. Some make them feel powerful. These emotional reactions are not random. They are responses to signals. And those signals can be learned, refined, and weaponized. Imagine learning to become a mirror that reflects back exactly what others need to see to trust you, admire you, depend on you, or underestimate you. Imagine learning to speak in a way that makes people feel as though they have arrived at your ideas themselves. Imagine learning to disappear just enough to become mysterious, to withdraw just enough to become valuable, to delay just enough to become desired. This is not manipulation as chaos. This is manipulation as architecture, carefully designed, structurally sound, invisible to those who live inside it. In this architecture, promises are not just words. They are emotional anchors. Favors are not kindness. They are investments. Secrets are not confessions. They are chains of intimacy. Praise is not encouragement. It is reinforcement. Silence is not absence. It is pressure. Distance is not indifference. It is scarcity. Every human interaction becomes a tool when you see it clearly enough, and every tool can build or dismantle, depending on who holds it. The frightening part is not that these techniques exist. The frightening part is that they are already being used every day by leaders, lovers, corporations, institutions, and quiet individuals who have learned through pain, failure, or observation that control is easier than persuasion, that guidance is more effective than confrontation, and that shaping choices is more powerful than giving orders. You may already feel the pull of this realization, the unsettling awareness that much of what you have believed to be spontaneous in human behavior is actually patterned, that much of what you thought was personal is actually universal, and that much of what you thought was fate is actually design. This awareness is not meant to comfort you. It is meant to awaken you. Because once you see how easily people are influenced, you also see how easily you have been influenced yourself. Every fear you carry, every ambition you hide, every loyalty you defend, every resentment you nurture, has been touched by invisible hands. Hands that know when to praise you, when to challenge you, when to ignore you, and when to offer you a seat at a table you were never meant to own. The question is not whether manipulation exists. The question is whether you will remain blind to it, or whether you will step into the shadows where it is forged and learn how to wield it. There is a reason Machiavelli's name still whispers through the halls of power centuries after his death. His ideas did not fade because they were too dark. They survived because they were too true. They decree, be not who we wish we were, but who we become when resources are scarce, when status is threatened, when love is conditional, and when survival is on the line. They describe the part of the human mind that calculates, compares, envies, and plots, while the conscious self insists on its own innocence. And now you stand at the threshold of that forbidden library, where strategies are written in the language of psychology, where dominance is disguised as charm, where obedience is wrapped in desire, and where control is hidden behind freedom. The door is not locked. It never was. Most people simply walk past it because they are too busy trying to be good, trying to be liked, trying to be understood, trying to be safe. But safety is a story we tell ourselves to sleep at night. Power is the story that decides who sleeps peacefully and who stays awake listening for footsteps. And once you hear those footsteps, once you realize how much of your life has been shaped by unseen strategies, by quiet influences, by carefully timed silences and selective kindness. You can never again be satisfied with ignorance. You will want to understand the mechanisms. You will want to see the strings. You will want to know how to pull them. Because in a world that quietly trains everyone to influence and be influenced, to manipulate and be manipulated, the most dangerous position is not that of the villain or the tyrant. It is the position of the innocent. And innocence, once lost, never truly returns. Do you feel it? The subtle shift in the air when someone notices you watching, calculating, measuring without the courtesy of pretense. There is a moment, fleeting, invisible to the careless eye, when a person exposes themselves, not in words, not in gestures, but in the trembling hesitation before a decision, the flicker of desire behind a mask of composure. That is where the work begins. Hat is where Machiavelli's lessons are not just read, they are enacted. To move people, to make them bend without breaking, you must first see the scaffolding of their psyche, the invisible architecture of their wants, fears, and ego. You must learn to read the symphony of signals they emit, consciously and unconsciously, like a spy reading the faintest tremor in a line of code, translating it into leverage. Influence begins with perception. Control is not about forcing someone's hand, it is about guiding their eyes to see a path you have already prepared. Consider the merchant in a crowded square offering choice after choice. He does not push the item into the buyer's hand. He frames desire, presenting options in a way that makes the purchase feel inevitable, natural, even self-directed. And the buyer leaves feeling clever, empowered, unseeing of the invisible hand that choreographed their movement. This is not persuasion in its naive form. It is manipulation refined to art. Every human is a merchant of choices, and every choice is a doorway to control. The one who designs the doorway decides the traffic. Begin with the simplest of tools, attention. Humans are born to crave recognition, the eyes that notice us, the ears that listen without judgment, the voice that punctuates our own thoughts with validation. All these become strings attached to our sense of self. A well-placed word, a carefully timed compliment, or even the subtle act of recalling a minor detail can bind a person to you, not through loyalty, but through the quiet intoxication of being understood. But beware, attention is currency. Spend it indiscriminately, and it loses its power. Reserve it, distribute it with intention. Make your presence feel scarce, your acknowledgement precious. Scarcity amplifies desire. It makes people chase what they think is fleeting. Then consider the manipulation of expectation. The human mind craves patterns. We find comfort in predictability and react to the unexpected with heightened sensitivity. If you appear reliable, consistent, even predictable in small, benign ways, the subtle chaos you introduce elsewhere shocks, distracts, and redirects attention. Imagine a friend who is always punctual, always warm in their greetings. Then one day, they arrive late, distracted, reserved. The sudden deviation causes an emotional ripple. People notice, they adjust, they reflect, they speculate. And in that moment of recalibration, their perception of you is pliable. They are searching for your true intentions, and while they search, you move unnoticed. Silence, too, wields power. Words are overrated. Most humans overcommunicate, betraying desires, anxieties, or weaknesses with every gesture, every inflection, every unintended pause. The silent observer, the one who does not rush to fill the space, becomes a mirror of others' vulnerabilities. People will speak to silence, project onto it, reveal secrets they would never share with noise. Let them speak. Your power grows not from speaking, but from listening, from noticing, from cataloging the small cracks in their armor. Knowledge is leverage, observation is a weapon, patience is the hand that wields it. Fear is a tool, not the terror that crushes, but the subtle psychological fear that heightens awareness, that sharpens attention, that positions you as the fulcrum upon which consequence balances. People are drawn to stability and predictability, but they respect those who command the potential of disruption. A slight tightening of control, a hint of unpredictability in reaction, a subtle withdrawal at the right moment. These create tension. Tension creates focus. Focus makes people act according to your design, believing the initiative is their own, when in truth, they are dancing. G to a rhythm only you can hear. Equally potent is the manipulation of desire. Humans are aspirational. We chase ideals, fantasies, narratives of what life should be. Show them what they want, reflect it with precision, make it tangible, and they will follow you willingly. Ambition, craving, envy, longing. These are levers more effective than threats, more precise than commands. The individual who desires recognition will climb toward it, unaware that you are the architect of the ascent. The one who fears irrelevance will cling to your guidance, thinking it their own choice. You do not need to coerce, you only need to illuminate the path with what they already want and guide their steps. Understand the duality of reward and restraint. People obey structure when it promises benefit. They rebel when it feels arbitrary. Offer rewards selectively, unpredictably, emotionally, so that every triumph they achieve feels like a personal victory. But remind them subtly that access to this benefit is always contingent on your approval. Simultaneously, deploy restraint judiciously. Withholding attention, delaying favors, pausing before agreement, these are subtle signals of dominance, of necessity, of value. The individual begins to calibrate themselves, to anticipate, to perform, all under your quiet orchestration. Control becomes seamless, invisible, natural. Recognize the power of narrative. Humans interpret reality through stories, through the sequence of events they can understand, through the meaning they can assign. Craft the narrative around yourself and others will position you within it favorably. Shape interpretations, frame outcomes, highlight some facts while obscuring others. The person who believes in your story will act consistently with it. They will defend it, reinforce it, and unconsciously align themselves with your objectives. Even morality, even loyalty, Eve. And integrity can be guided if it fits the narrative you design. The world does not respond to truth as it is. It responds to truth as it is perceived. Then there is the subtle art of contrast. Human perception is relative. We do not assess value in isolation but in comparison. By presenting extremes, exaggerating setbacks, highlighting minor victories, manipulating the ebb and flow of tension, you amplify your influence. Make people feel relief at small concessions, gratitude for minor recognition, indebtedness for slight attention. Let them see what they lack, what they aspire to, what is just beyond their reach. In this oscillation of hope and restraint, they are drawn, tethered, molded, without ever realizing the chain around their wrist. Timing is the invisible master. A word spoken too early, a gesture too late, a compliment before trust is earned. These are failures. The strategic mind waits, watches, anticipates, acts only when all variables align to magnify impact. Machiavelli did not advocate for haste, he advocated for precision. A single well-timed intervention can achieve what weeks of force cannot. Observe, calculate, wait. Strike when the human mind is most susceptible, when expectation and desire are aligned, when the subtle currents of emotion are at their strongest. People crave validation. They will bend to the one who affirms their self-image, their sense of competence, their narrative of morality or ambition. Praise carefully. Make it specific, personalized, and emotionally resonant. Too much praise, and it loses meaning. Too little, and it is unnoticed. But, delivered with timing and insight, it becomes an anchor. They will seek it, chase it, defend it. And while they chase it, they perform your design, unknowingly synchronizing their movements with your will. Fear, desire, expectation, attention, narrative, contrast, timing. These are the invisible levers that move people without overt command. But underlying them all is understanding. You cannot manipulate what you do not understand. Every human carries contradictions, shadows, unspoken rules, and hidden fears. Observe them, catalog them, test them. A glance, a pause, a deviation from routine, each is a data point. Combine these observations with patience, and you hold not just influence, but insight. And insight is the foundation of dominance. The ultimate lesson Machiavelli imparts is subtle. Control is not a blunt instrument. It is architecture, strategy, artistry. To bend the will of others, you do not crush, you guide. You do not coerce, you illuminate. You do not reveal, you conceal. People act according to their own perceptions, beliefs, and desires. Your role is to shape those perceptions, influence those beliefs, and quietly steer those desires so that action aligns with your intent. The hands appear free, but the clockwork is yours. This is the second layer of the dark knowledge. The human mind is predictable, pliable, and malleable if observed keenly and engaged with patiently. The one who rushes, who pushes too hard, who demands too loudly, exposes weakness. The one who waits, watches, and nudges subtly creates outcomes that appear natural, inevitable, self-directed. Power disguised as choice is the most potent power of all. And here is the cruel paradox. Most people do not realize they are being influenced until it is too late. They feel autonomous, independent, wise. Yet every subtle shift, every carefully orchestrated cue, every manipulated perception has drawn them along a path you designed. This is the quiet tyranny of mastery. It is unseen, unresisted, yet absolute in its effectiveness. It is invisible because it masquerades as free will, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The question is not whether you will use these levers. The question is whether you can perceive them, control them, and wield them without being discovered, not only by others, but by the temptation of your own ego. The most dangerous aspect of influence is its intoxicating symmetry. As you learn to move others, you also learn to move yourself, to mask your intentions, to sharpen your observation, to hide the ambition that burns beneath the surface. Mastery of others begins with mastery of self. In the shadows of desire, in the pauses between speech, in the invisible spaces between action and reaction, the subtle dance unfolds. People move as if by their own will, yet each step is predicted, anticipated, and guided by one who has learned to read the language of hidden currents. You see the strings, you know the leverages, you recognize the hunger, the pride, the fear, and in that knowing, you are no longer just a participant in human behavior. You are the architect of its motion, the quiet hand that tilts the scales, the unseen pulse that directs the rhythm of those around you. The power to make people do anything begins here, not with commands, not with force, not with threats, but with observation, with understanding, with patience, and with the patient application of knowledge that most fear to acknowledge, that humans are machines of desire and fear, and that those who learn their mechanics can direct them with precision, invisibly, irreversibly, unerringly. And once you step into that understanding, once you begin to trace the lines, measure the tremors, chart the desires, and manipulate the invisible architecture of human will, you will see the world differently. Every conversation becomes a negotiation, every encounter a map, every smile a clue, every pause a potential. You begin to move through life not as a leaf in the current, but as the quiet stream beneath the surface, shaping, guiding, controlling, unseen, unstop. Pable, inevitable. Imagine a room filled with people, each carrying a lifetime of secrets, ambitions, and fears. Each one is a universe of desires, of grudges, of unspoken calculations. Most wander blindly, guided by habit, by impulse, by the illusion that their choices are free. Yet, in truth, their movements are predictable, their reactions chartable, their loyalty, attention, and fear all commodities to be read and traded. The one who perceives this, who steps beyond the veil of superficial behavior, gains an almost terrifying advantage. This is where the art of Machiavellian influence becomes not just strategy, but a psychological symphony, where every note is calculated, every pause purposeful, every crescendo an orchestration of human instinct. The most potent tool in the arsenal of control is subtlety. People resist what is obvious, they submit to what appears self-evident. The mind recoils from force but embraces guidance cloaked as choice. The manipulator who understands this knows that the moment to act is rarely when the desire is obvious, but when it is nascent, when it can be shaped without resistance. Consider a leader who wants obedience. Issuing commands may inspire action, but crafting situations in which subordinates choose the desired action themselves ensures compliance with a permanence that overt control cannot achieve. The illusion of autonomy binds more tightly than chains. Emotional manipulation is the invisible hand that moves human behavior. Every human carries an internal narrative, a story they tell themselves to rationalize choices, justify desires, and protect fragile self-esteem. Tap into that narrative, and you can guide decisions before they are consciously made. Compliments must mirror ambition, acknowledgement must reinforce identity, and praise must appear organic, arising naturally from actions that you have subtly engineered. The target believes they are performing independently, yet every reinforcement, every validation, every small reward has been strategically placed to ensure alignment with your objectives. In this way, influence feels natural, inevitable, irresistible, People are slaves to consistency. They strive to see themselves as rational, capable, and moral, even when actions contradict reality. Exploit this by anchoring desired behavior to their self-image. Let a person act once in accordance with the direction you wish to guide them, then subtly remind them of this action in subsequent interactions. The human mind, fearing cognitive dissonance, will seek to maintain this image, repeating behaviors to align with the narrative they believe is theirs alone. Influence becomes self-perpetuating. The trick is patience. The first act must feel voluntary, the second inevitable, the third unremarkable, and by the fourth, your control is internalized by the person themselves. Isolation is a quiet weapon. Humans are herd creatures. They look for cues, for consensus, for social validation. Remove these reference points, and uncertainty arises. Uncertainty creates reliance. A well-timed withdrawal of support, a subtle act of social detachment, or the careful placement of doubt can compel a person to turn to you for guidance. In the absence of external validation, your interpretation of events becomes authoritative. They seek your counsel, your approval, your direction. The mind that believes itself autonomous is quietly tethered to your influence, and the bond is invisible, unbreakable under normal scrutiny. Contrast and comparison sharpen perception and heighten influence. People evaluate opportunity and risk relative to their experiences and expectations. By presenting alternatives strategically, you can make the desired choice appear superior without ever stating it directly. Small s. Sacrifices, minor deprivations, or the illusion of challenge enhance the perceived value of what you offer. Humans chase reward more vigorously when it is earned, and they resist control less when they feel it was their own careful calculation that led them to comply. In effect, the greater the perceived difficulty, the stronger the internalization of your guidance. Narrative framing is perhaps the most sophisticated lever. People act not only according to desire or fear, but according to the story they believe explains reality. Shape that story, and their behavior follows. Highlight certain facts, omit others, and contextualize events to align with your strategic goals. If a subordinate believes loyalty is tied to self-preservation, frame decisions in a way that implies their best interest coincides with your command. If an associate craves admiration, construct situations where obedience or alignment with your plan enhances their perceived status. Reality itself becomes pliable when filtered through the stories you craft. The manipulation of anticipation is subtle yet devastatingly effective. Humans constantly predict outcomes, measure probabilities, and adjust behavior in advance. Introduce controlled uncertainty, hints of opportunity, suggestion of consequence, veiled possibilities. Let them fill in the gaps, project their hopes and fears, and act on assumptions that you have planted. When their choices align with your intent, it is not through coercion but through a carefully designed architecture of expectation and desire. They chase shadows you cast, and by the time realization dawns, the pattern is complete. Observation is not passive, it is active strategy. Every gesture, every hesitation, every micro-expression carries meaning. The tilt of the head, the tone of voice, the lapse in eye contact, each is data, each a potential lever. Record, compare, test, plaque. Small variables, measure reactions. Like a general mapping terrain before battle, the Machiavellian mind charts the landscape of human emotion and cognition, identifying hills to seize, rivers to cross, and hidden valleys where influence can accumulate silently, invisibly, until action is inevitable. Patience is not weakness, it is calculation. Immediate gratification signals to others that they are unpredictable. Waiting, watching, delaying response. All signal control, authority, and value. A well-timed absence enhances attention. A delayed reply intensifies desire. People are drawn to scarcity, to the rare, the unpredictable, the untouchable. By withholding, by pausing, by creating subtle tension, you make the ordinary extraordinary, the mundane precious, and your presence indispensable. The mind seeks what is rare, and you define what is rare by controlling your own exposure. The manipulation of reciprocity is foundational. Humans are bound by social contracts, subtle or explicit. Favors, concessions, and assistance create a debt, often unconscious, that the recipient seeks to repay. Deliver strategically, small enough to be appreciated, large enough to be memorable. time to maximize emotional impact. Then observe as the person bends to repay, as their behavior aligns with your design. Reciprocity is not altruism, it is architecture of obligation. The aware strategist can harvest compliance in ways overt force never achieves. Fear, carefully applied, is a companion to reward. The threat need not be overt, it must be credible, subtle, consistent. People are motivated by avoidance as strongly as by attainment. Present potential loss alongside opportunity, hint at consequences without explicit threat, and you steer action without confrontation. The mind acts to avert discomfort, to mitigate risk, to preserve status and self-image. When fear is aligned with desire, action becomes both inevitable and self-motivated, a response orchestrated by unseen hands. Layering these methods, attention, expectation, narrative, contrast, observation, patience, reciprocity, fear, desire, creates an ecosystem of influence. Each technique reinforces the others, generating compliance that feels organic, voluntary, and rational. This is mastery, not coercion. People act as they believe they must, yet each step was designed with precision. They are simultaneously autonomous and guided, unaware that their decisions are echoes of your design. The ultimate power is invisible, sustainable, unstoppable because it masquerades as choice. Machiavelli did not suggest these strategies to glorify manipulation, nor to condone cruelty. He described reality as it exists, unsentimental and unflinching, revealing the mechanics of influence to those willing to see clearly. In his world, understanding human behavior is not optional. Survival and success depend on it. Knowledge is not merely power, it is control, and control, when exercised with subtlety and patience, transforms human behavior from chaos into architecture, from randomness into obedience, from unpredictability into a carefully guided dance. Every act of manipulation is a conversation, a test, a negotiation with the subconscious currents of desire, fear, pride, and ambition. The more nuanced the approach, the more effective the outcome. The untrained manipulator relies on blunt force, the Machiavellian strategist relies on timing, observation, expectation, and the subtle shaping of perception. They do not break wills, they guide them. They do not demand compliance, they create it. And the human mind, craving coherence and autonomy, follows willingly, believing every step is of its own volition. You are now entering the deeper terrain, where the line between influence and mastery blurs. The knowledge is intoxicating because it grants sight into the hidden patterns of human behavior, revealing the levers that govern loyalty, desire, fear, and obedience. The practitioner of this knowledge learns not only to move others but to refine themselves, to conceal ambition, to moderate emotion, to observe without bias, to act with precision, to calibrate every gesture, word, and decision. In this quiet mastery, influence becomes effortless, natural, and absolute. And as you continue, you will begin to see every interaction as a tableau, every choice as a lever, every human as a system to be understood and guided. The world will no longer appear random or governed by chance. You will notice patterns, anticipate reactions, engineer outcomes. And once you glimpse the machinery beneath human behavior, the question becomes not how to act, but whether you will act, and with what discipline, subtlety, and ruthlessness you will wield the invisible power you now perceive. Consider the mind as a fortress, each individual carrying within them walls built from experience, ego, fear, pride, and desire. Most people wander through life as if these walls are invisible, unaware of the gates, the weak points, the corridors of influence that can be entered with subtlety and patience. The Machiavellian strategist sees these walls not as barriers but as maps, blueprints of human behavior waiting to be read, exploited, and guided. To influence, to bend, to control, one must understand both the structure and the psychology of the person within it, learning which doors to knock on, which windows to open, and which fortifications to leave undisturbed. The first principle is recognition, understanding that humans are motivated more by fear, desire, and perception than by logic or reason. Every action is a response to an internal calculus of risk and reward. They do not act randomly, they act according to patterns shaped by past experiences and anticipated outcomes. Observing these patterns allows the strategist to predict behavior, anticipate resistance, and position interventions where they will be most effective. To see a person clearly is to gain the power to guide them, invisibly and inevitably. Manipulation begins with empathy, not sentimental understanding, but cold, strategic empathy. To predict another's choices, you must feel their fears, taste their desires, inhabit their ambitions. Not for kindness, not for moral alignment, but for calculation. The moment you understand what drives them, what they prize above all else, you gain leverage. Their priorities become the keys to influence, the gates through which you can guide their actions, the scaffolding upon which you can build obedience, without ever appearing to lift a finger. Scarcity is a weapon both subtle and brutal. Humans desire what is rare, what is difficult to attain, what is not freely available. Withhold attention, delay recognition, create scarcity of time, access, or approval. When people perceive that value is limited, their motivation intensifies. They chase, they comply, they strategize themselves to attain what you control. This is not coercion. It is the quiet architecture of desire, the shaping of behavior through invisible constraints, guiding action without overt force. Contradiction is a tool of manipulation. Humans are inconsistent by nature, torn between ideals and instincts, fear and ambition, ego and reality. The Machiavellian strategist exploits this tension. Present choices that align with their aspirations, but subtly direct outcomes to your advantage. Offer praise while introducing small doubts. Reward initiative while maintaining subtle constraints. People act to resolve the contradictions within themselves, and in doing so, they often perform exactly as you intend, believing it to be their own rational decision. Observation is never passive. Every gesture, hesitation, inflection, and glance is data. Humans communicate continuously, often unknowingly, through micro-expressions, body language, and emotional leakage. The patient strategist catalogues these signals, analyzes patterns, and tests boundaries with small, imperceptible interventions. Each reaction is a data point, each emotional response a clue. From this information, influence can be applied precisely, efficiently, invisibly. The mind that observes does not just react, it anticipates, calculates, and engineers outcomes before they manifest. The manipulation of expectation is subtle but devastatingly effective. Humans crave predictability, but respond to the unexpected with heightened attention. Appear consistent in trivial matters, then deviate strategically in ways that provoke reflection, curiosity, or admiration. Let others believe they are uncovering your intentions themselves. This is the art of the invisible hand, shaping behavior not through command, but through subtle adjustment of perception. The human mind acts eagerly on what it believes it chooses freely, unaware of the architecture of influence guiding it. Reciprocity is a psychological anchor. Humans are wired to repay favors, concessions, and recognition. Small, well-timed gestures can create obligations, subtle yet compelling. Deliver a favor, acknowledgement, or piece of attention strategically, then withdraw it just enough to heighten value. People will bend to repay, often anticipating your wishes to remain in harmony with their sense of obligation. This is the quiet tyranny of influence. The indebted mind acts predictably, seeking to restore balance according to rules you have quietly defined. Timing, perhaps more than any other factor, governs influence. Words spoken too early, gestures too late, recognition before trust is earned. These are errors that undermine power. The Machiavellian strategist understands the rhythm of human behavior, waits for the precise moment, and acts with precision. A single well-timed word or action can achieve in an instant what weeks of pressure cannot. The mind is most pliable at the junction of expectation, desire, and uncertainty. Strike there and compliance becomes instinctive, seamless, and self-directed. Narrative is the veil behind which control is hidden. Humans act according to the stories they tell themselves, the frameworks they use to interpret events. Shape these narratives carefully. Highlight successes that align with your plan, obscure failures that might sow doubt, frame events to reflect the outcomes you desire. People will defend and reinforce narratives they believe are theirs. You do not command action directly, you orchestrate perception so that behavior naturally follows. Reality bends to the narrative, and those within it are unaware they have been guided. Contrast sharpens influence. Humans evaluate decisions comparatively rather than absolutely. Present extremes, highlight minor victories, exaggerate setbacks subtly. Make compliance feel like triumph, restraint feel like discipline, and obedience feel like achievement. Through contrast, even minor concessions appear significant. Even small gestures seem meaningful. People are drawn to relative gain and relative safety, and the strategist guides both without force. They act voluntarily, yet their actions are meticulously orchestrated. Fear, properly applied, is a companion to desire. Not terror, not panic, but subtle, credible anticipation of consequence. Humans are risk-averse, sensitive to threats to self-image, status, and security. Introduce the possibility of loss or disappointment without overt aggression. Let the mind internalize the threat, anticipate consequences, and adjust behavior proactively. In combination with desire and reward, subtle fear directs choices precisely, aligning behavior with your strategic objectives while leaving the person convinced of their autonomy. Layer these techniques: observation, patience, empathy, scarcity, contradiction, reciprocity, expectation, narrative, contrast, timing, fear, and you create a web of influence so intricate that action appears spontaneous while being entirely guided. Compliance becomes voluntary, choices seem independent, yet every decision traces back to the architecture you have constructed. This is mastery, invisible and durable, sustained by the very psychology of the individuals it shapes. The Machiavellian strategist does not impose control, they cultivate it, they underst. And the mind, as both mechanism and mystery, capable of precision but guided by emotion, ego, and desire. Influence is not an act of domination but an orchestration of perception. The strategist waits, observes, nudges, and only then acts, ensuring that compliance is natural, inevitable, and internally rationalized by the subject. The power is unseen, the control seamless, and the outcome predetermined in the architecture of human behavior. And yet, mastery requires self-discipline. The strategist must conceal ambition, moderate emotion, maintain observation, and act with restraint. One misstep, one visible desire, one hasty intervention, and the delicate network of influence can unravel. Patience, subtlety, and precision are not optional, they are survival. In this arena, the mind that observes and controls is both weapon and shield, simultaneously shaping others and safeguarding its own position. As you advance into this understanding, the world transforms. Every interaction becomes an opportunity for influence. Every gesture, word, and glance carries potential. The environment itself becomes a landscape to navigate strategically, not passively. You begin to perceive the patterns, predict reactions, and construct outcomes before they manifest. The line between free will and guided action blurs, and the practitioner of this knowledge moves with the certainty of one who understands the hidden currents beneath the visible surface of human behavior. This is the mastery Machiavelli observed, distilled, and described, the subtle, patient, precise orchestration of perception, expectation, desire, and fear to guide human behavior without overt coercion. Influence becomes invisible, sustainable, and irresistible because it is internalized by the mind itself. The strategist does not force. They craft, mold, and direct the currents of choice until obedience and alignment are voluntary, natural, and inevitable. The practitioner now stands at the precipice, where observation becomes orchestration, empathy becomes leverage, patience becomes inevitability, and influence becomes art. Every individual is a system to be read, every interaction a lever to be applied, and every desire and fear a channel to be navigated. The world ceases to appear chaotic, for the patterns are visible, the currents discernible, and the architecture of human action fully legible to the one who has learned to see beyond surface behavior into the mechanisms of choice and compliance. There comes a moment when the strategist realizes that influence is not merely about guiding others, but about constructing an environment in which their choices are already aligned with your will before a word is spoken. This is the stage where control transcends interaction and becomes atmosphere, where the room itself seems to lean in your favor, where the currents of attention, expectation, and emotion already flow in the direction you desire. People feel it without naming it. They enter your presence and sense an invisible gravity, a quiet pull that invites compliance, curiosity, and alignment, long before they are conscious of deciding anything at all. This is the architecture of dominance at its most refined. You no longer chase loyalty, loyalty gravitates toward you. You no longer seek validation, validation seeks you. Your influence does not shout, it hums beneath the surface, like a low-frequency signal that subtly alters behavior, thought, and emotional posture. Those around you begin to mirror your tempo, adjust their tone, and calibrate their expectations to fit your rhythm, all while believing they are simply responding to circumstance. The deepest layer of control is the shaping of identity. People do not only act, they act in accordance with who they believe they are. A person who believes they are loyal will behave loyally. One who believes they are independent will defend the very structure that guides them. One who believes they are ambitious will walk paths you quietly lay before them. The Machiavellian strategist does not argue with identity, they cultivate it. They nurture narratives within others that make obedience feel like self-expression and alignment feel like authenticity. Once identity is shaped, behavior follows effortlessly, persistently, and without resistance. You begin to see how entire social systems are guided this way. Organizations, families, communities, and institutions do not move by rules alone. They move by the invisible stories people tell themselves about who they are within those systems. The obedient worker believes they are dedicated. The loyal follower believes they are principled. The compliant citizen believes they are responsible. Each identity becomes a self-sustaining engine of behavior, and those who understand how to shape identity quietly rule without appearing to rule at all. This is where the strategist learns the art of symbolic authority, not authority of position, but authority of perception, the quiet nod that validates, the subtle pause that signals judgment, the calm response that implies stability and certainty. Over time, your reactions become the compass by which others navigate uncertainty. They begin to look to you not because you demand it, but because you have become the reference point, the axis around which their decisions orbit. In moments of doubt, they ask what you would think. In moments of fear, they wonder what you would advise. And in doing so, they hand you the keys to their choices. Power here is not loud, it is serene. It feels like calm certainty in a chaotic world, and people crave that calm more than they admit. They crave someone who appears unshaken, mere, assured, deliberate. They crave an anchor, and when you become that anchor, their trust becomes dependency, their admiration becomes allegiance, and their allegiance becomes obedience, all while believing they are simply seeking guidance. Scarcity deepens this effect. You do not make yourself constantly available. You do not respond immediately. You do not distribute your approval freely. You become selective, measured, and rare. Each interaction gains weight. Each word becomes meaningful. Each nod carries consequence. People begin to treasure your attention as if it were a limited resource, and in doing so, they reorganize their behavior around earning it. You do not ask for loyalty. They perform it. The strategist also learns to weaponize calmness. While others react emotionally, you remain composed. While others rush, you wait. While others argue, you observe. Calmness signals confidence, control, and foresight. It unsettles those who are unsure and attracts those who are seeking stability. In tense moments, your serenity becomes authority. Your lack of visible urgency implies that you already understand what others are still struggling to process. This asymmetry of emotional posture creates an invisible hierarchy, placing you above the chaos while others orbit below. Another layer unfolds in the manipulation of group dynamics. Humans take cues from each other, and the strategist understands that influence multiplies when it flows through networks, rather than directly from you. You seed opinions subtly. You affirm certain voices and ignore others. You elevate some perspectives and quietly diminish the visibility of competing ones. Over time, the group itself begins to enforce the norms that serve your design. You are no longer the source of pressure. The social environment becomes your instrument. In this phase, control becomes self-sustaining. People regulate shudder. They defend the structure. They shame dissent. They reward compliance. And you remain above it, calm and quiet, appearing as a neutral presence while the system you shaped maintains itself. This is the highest efficiency of influence, when you are no longer needed to intervene, because the architecture you built continues to guide behavior in your absence. Yet even here, restraint is essential. The strategist must never reveal the full extent of their insight. Mystery protects authority. If people believe they understand you completely, your influence weakens. But if they sense depth, if they suspect layers beneath your calm exterior, their imagination fills in the gaps with assumptions of power, wisdom, and foresight. Their minds amplify your presence beyond your actions. You become larger than your words, heavier than your gestures, more influential than your position. The strategist also learns to use contrast not only in interaction but in personal presentation. You do not always speak. You do not always assert. You choose moments of quiet and moments of decisive action. This rhythm makes your interventions feel significant. When you finally do act, it feels like a turning point. People pay attention, they remember, they adjust. Your actions become landmarks in the emotional and psychological landscape of those around you. All of this is sustained by relentless observation. You continue to read micro-shifts in mood, tone, loyalty, and fear. You continue to catalog reactions, test boundaries, and adjust the architecture. Influence is not static, it is dynamic, evolving with the people it guides. The strategist does not cling to rigid formulas. They adapt, refine, and recalibrate, ensuring the control remains invisible, effective, and natural. At this level, the line between manipulation and reality dissolves. The environment you shaped becomes the reality people experience. Their choices, reactions, and beliefs align with the structure you designed, and they feel no conflict because the structure resonates with their identity, desire, and fear. They do not feel controlled. They feel at home. They feel understood. They feel safe. And in that safety, they surrender their autonomy willingly, never suspecting that it has been quietly redirected. You now stand in a world that looks the same to others, but feels profoundly different to you. You see the invisible currents beneath conversations. You hear the unspoken motives behind polite words. You sense the hidden hierarchies shaping behavior. You know where influence is weakest, where loyalty is fragile, and where desire can be redirected with a whisper. You move through life not as a participant alone, but as an architect of outcomes, a silent conductor of human motion. And as this awareness deepens, you begin to understand that true dominance is not about ruling others overtly. It is about shaping the space in which they choose, the stories by which they define themselves, and the emotional climate in which they act. It is about becoming the unseen gravity that bends trajectories, the quiet certainty that draws decisions toward you, the hidden hand that turns possibility into inevitability. You are no longer merely influencing behavior, you are shaping worlds. And now the silence deepens, not because the lesson has ended, but because the mirror has been raised. You have walked through shadowed corridors of understanding that most people avoid, not because they are forbidden, but because they are uncomfortable. You have seen how desire can be guided, how fear can be sculpted, how identity can be shaped, how environments can be engineered to move human beings like tides beneath a moon they do not realize is artificial. You have felt the quiet gravity of influence, the calm authority of presence, the power of scarcity, the pull of narrative, the architecture of perception. You have begun to recognize that what appears spontaneous is often designed, that what feels chosen is often prepared, that what seems natural is frequently constructed. This is the point where many turn back. They close the door gently. They tell themselves that it is better not to know. They choose the comfort of innocence over the weight of clarity. They decide that seeing too much is dangerous, and they are right, because once you truly understand how people move, you cannot unsee it. You begin to notice the invisible hierarchies in every room. You hear the hidden negotiations inside casual conversations. You feel the currents of influence shaping reactions, alliances, conflicts, and loyalty long before words are spoken. You realize that most lives are not led, but steered, not chosen, but channeled, not random, but patterned. And then a more unsettling realization arrives. You are not exempt. You never were. Your beliefs, your ambitions, your fears, your loyalties, your definitions of success and failure, of love and worth, of right and wrong, have all been touched by unseen hands, carefully, patiently, strategically. You were shaped by teachers, by families, by systems, by culture, by approval, by rejection, by reward, by silence, by expectation. You were guided long before you were aware that guidance was happening, and in that awareness, something fundamental changes. You stand at a crossroads. One path leads back into comfortable blindness, where you continue to move as you always have, influenced, nudged, framed, rewarded, corrected, and quietly guided by forces you do not question. It is the softer road, the quieter one, the road where life feels familiar, predictable, and safe, even as it remains shaped by invisible hands. The other path, is colder, sharper, heavier. It is the path of conscious agency, the path where you stop merely reacting to currents and begin to recognize them, where you stop confusing comfort with truth, where you stop mistaking safety for freedom, where you stop being only an effect and begin becoming a cause. This is not a promise of kindness. It is not a promise of fairness. It is not a promise of peace. It is a promise of clarity. Clarity that strips away illusions. Clarity that exposes mechanisms. Clarity that reveals how power actually moves, how loyalty is actually formed, how obedience is actually created, how influence is actually sustained. Clarity that teaches you to walk into rooms differently, to speak differently, to listen differently, to wait differently, to act differently. Clarity that slowly, inevitably, transforms you from a participant into a variable that others must calculate, from someone shaped by environments into someone who shapes them, from someone reacting to narratives into someone who defines them, from someone chasing validation into someone who becomes a reference point, from someone seeking security into someone who becomes stability. And this is where the final choice lives. You can remain a character in other people's designs, or you can begin to understand how designs are written. You can continue to live inside narratives, or you can learn how narratives are formed. You can keep moving through invisible structures, or you can learn how those structures are built, because power is not always loud, control is not always visible, and influence does not always announce itself. It moves quietly, it settles gently, it reshapes lives without raising its voice. The question is no longer whether these forces exist. You have already seen them. The question is what you will do now that you can see. Will you remain comfortable? Or will you become precise? Will you continue to be shaped? Or will you begin to shape? The door is still open. Step forward.